Yeah, it's been interesting to try to get information out and to try to dispel misinformation. It's been remarkable the amount of misinformation about this bill. The bill itself actually builds more border wall, adds more detention beds, adds more deportation flights, adds more ICE officers, more border patrol. It dramatically changes the way we actually screen for fentanyl at our borders, adds more devices to be able to detect fentanyl and more interdiction, adds sanctions to the cartels about fentanyl. It changes the asylum laws dramatically to make it much harder to be able to get asylum coming to the United States, increases detention for those that are here, and fast deportations, where we actually removed a lot of the appeals process in all these asylum requests. So it doesn't take 10 years as it does now. It takes days, weeks, or at the most months to be able to deport people out of the country rather than a decade-long process that currently exists. So it's a very dramatic shift in how we're actually doing immigration policy to be able to make sure we're securing our border to get us to zero people illegally crossing our border. That's the target all the time. But it's also been interesting all the rumors and false stories that are out there. There's this false story that it allows 5,000 people to be able to come in every day, which is absolutely absurd and completely false. There is this authority that's out there to say if we have caravans and we get overrun at one point, we don't have a time where we release people into the country, which is what happens now. The default is always just to stop everything and deport everyone. No one can request asylum. No one can do anything. Now, we've got all these other processes that make it really hard to be able to get through at lower numbers, but we never want to have a time like we've had for months now of just thousands and thousands of people coming. So that default is there to be able to turn it around, but it's only in the most extreme case. There's also all these weird stories that it has amnesty in it, which is bizarre because there's no amnesty at all of any type in this bill. It's focused on border security and try to make sure that we're encouraging legal immigration and stopping illegal immigration.
What's the timeline for that you guys are looking at as we're discussing this?
Yeah, so the next 24 hours there'll be a what's called a procedural vote. It doesn't actually start the real debate. It basically is a vote to say, are we going to start debate on this? And in my conference among Republicans in the Senate, there's a real split on it. It's a, do we want to take this up at all at this point, or do we want to take it up and amend it? My focus has been how do we take it up and amend it and to be able to keep going through the process. Obviously, there's things that even I would like to be able to have different on this. This was a bipartisan negotiation for months. And so when we get it to the floor, we can work to actually amend it and continue to be able to make it even better in the days ahead. So that's the question that'll come out in the next 24 hours is, do we set this aside? As the House has asked for, because the House Republicans have said we don't want to do anything on border security at all right now. We want to just stick to what the president can already do. We don't want to pass anything on it. Or do we actually try to be able to fix some of these issues? My issue has been pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
There have been problems in the law dealing with immigration for years. Some presidents are better than others, obviously, at enforcing the law. President Trump was a lot better at enforcing the law. But quite frankly, President Biden isn't enforcing the law even as well as President Obama did. So this president needs to enforce the laws they already have. But there's also been long-term problems with asylum laws and other things that we have to fix as well. So it's a matter of trying to be able to do both.
I want to be able to get to some of the specifics, but first, I do want to ask you your immediate reaction to. Let's take. I'll use this from the lens of our Arkansas senators because they present two different cases. One here is Senator Bozeman, who has asked for the amendment process. You just said you'd support the idea of bringing an amendment process to the Senate before actually putting this to the House.
I would actually support an amendment process because I think it's the way the Senate actually works its will, and you have the opportunity for every senator to be able to say there's something I want to be able to change. Quite frankly, on this issue, I think we could have a pretty robust amendment process to be able to actually have that conversation and debate on the floor, and then to be able to make changes that I think would be very helpful in this bill.
To go to the other Arkansas senator who stated opposition to this bill, Senator Tom Cotton. I think this is, though, emblematic of the people who would oppose this bill at this time, who saying similar things here, talking about the deference to the asylum claims to a different agency outside the asylum courts.
There's two different sets of folks that can make a decision here. You've got asylum officers or immigration judges. And by the way, immigration judges are not really judges. They're actually immigration attorneys that work for the Department of Justice. So I've got either folks that are asylum officers or these attorneys that work for the Department of Justice. They're the two people that can make decisions in this process. Some people prefer the immigration judges that work for DHS to be able to do that. Some folks prefer the asylum officers. What I don't want to have is a slower process on this. I want to be able to make sure we're getting a clear decision that is fact-based to be able to qualify those folks that apply for asylum, whether they get it or not, and then we have very fast deportations. And in this process, the faster process are the asylum officers, and we raise the standard significantly. They've got to be able to go through. So we thought it's a pretty cut and dry process. It's pretty straightforward to be able to ask, could you have stayed somewhere else on the way coming in instead of coming all the way to America? Could you have actually stayed in your own home country and been safe in another town? You might have been unsafe in one town, but there are other places in your country that are safe. If that's so, you don't qualify for asylum and you're out. Those are yes or no issues. It doesn't matter who's making the decision on it. It's cut and dried. The vast majority of people do not qualify for asylum that come to this country.
So you would refute the idea that Secretary Mayorkas, who would lead these asylum officers, as Tom Cotton claims, would be a weaker system in terms of getting these asylum claims either granted or not.
Yeah, I can't just look at what the current secretary is now. He's only going to be secretary for a few more months at the most at this point. So the current secretary, I've got to look at who's the long-term people to be able to be there. The next president, the next president, the next president on it. What's the right way to be able to handle this? You will have the same issue with immigration judges, by the way. They just work for the Department of Justice. The immigration judges are these attorneys that work for Merrick Garland. So I've either got the folks that work for Merrick Garland right now, or they work for Ali Mayorkas. And for many conservatives I talk to, they're not happy with either of them in their leadership. And so, but those are my two options now. We're going to have an election in November. We'll have very different options in the days ahead.
Let's talk about catch and release for a moment. That's another point of contention where some would say that this would codify catch and release, but obviously reading your bill, that's a refuted claim. You would argue here, reading this, and I'm assuming, but feel free to elaborate, that this would resist catch and release practices by not allowing individuals to come into the country while they wait for asylum claims. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
So right now, people that cross the border, they get a piece of paper saying they've got a court hearing, sometimes 8 to 10 years in the future, and they're just released in the country. That's catch and release. What we do on this is we have a very fast screening process. We increase the number of detention beds to 50,000 at the border. And so that's a very large number to be able to hold in detention so they're not being released in the country. And for like families and some other folks that will end up being released in it, we actually have a very tight process that is days or weeks, at the most 3 months. So we're ending that 10-year clock of when they actually get their hearing, making sure they're getting it fast. The key thing is you've got to have consequences quickly. If you don't have consequences quickly, you don't have consequences at all. We also protect the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump used so effectively. So that could also be used, but obviously that's president to president on how they're going to use this. So a future president could do Remain in Mexico. We'll have 50,000 detention beds. And for the very small group that actually goes through the process of actually being outside of detention, it's a very rapid hearing process. So we're deporting quickly and they can't get planted inside the country somewhere.
The final note I want to bring up, and another point of contention here, is the extra green cards. Was that a negotiation tool, or was that something that there was a deliberate intention on your part to include this provision in the bill as well?
Yeah, this is a negotiated bill where there are Democrats and Republicans together to be able to work through and to be able to determine how are we going to get a bill that's going to pass between both of our conferences on it. One of the things that Democrats asked for was all kinds of people that are in the country illegal to get extra benefits, to be able to get citizenship. We blocked all of those, said no to every single one of those, said this is a border about national security. But we did agree on legal immigration. I don't find many people that are opposed to legal immigration. They're opposed to illegal immigration. So this does do a slight bump up to people that legally want to come to the country, pay the fees, go through the long vetting, actually do all that it takes to be able to do legal immigration. Our nation actually legalizes right at 1 million people a year. Year after year, we've done that for decades. Right at 1 million people a year are able to naturalize. This allows 50,000 more to be able to naturalize as well on top of that 1 million if they will go through all the vetting, all the background pay, all the fees, get in line to be able to do the process the right way. This has the mindset of we have gates and we have fences. Those gates need to be gates that we're actually bringing legal immigration through, as we have always done as a country. But the high fences are also about blocking, so we have zero illegal immigration.
As we go to, I guess, the greater picture that this bill presents, it is a compromise at the end of the day, as you discussed earlier. Were this bill to be killed or, I guess, changed beyond recognition here, what does that say about our ability to compromise and actually produce something meaningful on the border moving forward?
It's a very hard issue, and a lot of people are extremely angry about what's happening on the border. It's not just a partisan issue. I talk to Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They're just angry that we have so many people that are crossing the border and no one's making it stop. President Biden has authorities that he is not using right now that he could dramatically slow down the flow on the border, but he chooses not to use it. There's also legal gaps in the system that need to be addressed as well to tighten it down even more. So my desire is to be able to get it as tight as we can get it in law, to push this administration to use all the powers they have at their disposal, and those two things together to be able to really push the numbers down dramatically. First things first, President Biden needs to be able to actually enforce the law. But we as a Congress, Republicans and Democrats, have got to admit there are loopholes in the law, and we've got to be able to sit down and actually be able to fix those in a way that we can agree. Right now, we have a Democrat Senate, a Republican House, and a Democrat president. We've got to sit down and be able to work things out together. But even if we have a Republican House, Republican Senate, and a Republican president, we're probably not going to have 60 votes of Republicans in the Senate. So that still means we're going to have a bipartisan conversation to be able to work this out. Thankfully, there are a lot of Americans of all political persuasions that are outside of Washington that they see this as a problem. It's just getting people inside Washington to actually sit down, work it out, and come to agreement.
How do you view the next couple of days, I would assume, or maybe couple of weeks, depending on how long negotiations go, in terms of trying to talk to your own party, members of the opposite party, trying to coalesce support for this, especially given vocal opposition from notable people like the House Speaker, like President Trump, already to a bill that you've worked on with both your colleagues and the Democrats as well?
Yeah, our worst case scenario is to do nothing. We have to be able to get something done. The status quo is completely unacceptable. So we need President Biden to enforce the laws that he has. We need to tighten up existing laws to be able to make sure that we can really clamp down on the chaos that's happening at the border, and we can rapidly turn people around, not just now, but also for authorities in the future, for every future president. So in the days ahead, I'm going to continue to be able to talk to colleagues. I'm going to continue to encourage them to say, if not this bill, would you sit down with Democrats the same as I have, and to be able to work through what does it take to actually get to resolution? Because we can't just look at each other and do press conferences and say, this is bad, this is good. At some point, we have to sit down, talk to each other, figure out where's the common ground, and then pass a bill to make the change.
And you believe this is the bill, sir?
This is a bill that's sitting in front of us, and I'm eager to be able to amend it, send it to the House, let them amend it, and let's see if we can figure out how to be able to solve the problem. It's the one sitting in front of us right now that's the closest we've got, where we've got both Democrats and Republicans in large numbers that are supportive of. We've also got people that oppose it, and we've got some people that say, do nothing. I don't want to do anything at all. I get all that. I can respect that dialogue. That's the nature of America. We don't all agree on everything, but we do have to be able to sit down with people that we disagree with, solve our differences, make a change in law, and start working on the next problem.
Yeah, I know you have to believe that that's possible here, but if I'm to ask you directly here, do you believe that there is a path forward with the House Speaker calling this bill dead on arrival?
Here's what I believe. We have a major national security crisis on our southern border that every American sees. Congress needs to see it the same way every American does. This is hard. It's noisy. But the reason we were elected was to sit down and to be able to solve hard, noisy, difficult things. This is what we do as a Congress. This is our job. My main focus is when we see a problem on the national security issue on our southern border or anywhere else, we need to address it. So for me, it's hard, it's noisy, it's loud. There's lots of misinformation of things that are not true. And people are trying to go through a bill to try to figure out what is true on it and how it would make a significant difference. But in that all that noise, we still have to sit down and solve a very hard problem. We need a secure border with zero people illegally crossing our border illegally.
Did you expect this bill to energize Republicans? I know there's a lot of blowback against it, but I know a lot of these provisions are long held desired positions from Republicans. I mean, I just remember previously this year saying, "Oh, we'd only work on foreign aid if it came with border provisions," and here we are with exactly that.
Yeah, it is. This bill does a lot of the issues we've talked about for a long time, changing the asylum law, building more wall, adding more ICE officers, adding more detention beds, adding more deportation flights, rapidly increasing the hearings so that we can deport people much faster and getting rid of all those different appeals that are out there. This does a lot of the things that we have talked about for a very long time, and it does not include any amnesty. For many Republicans, that is enough to be able to say, great, we're making progress. It's not a perfect bill. It's not everything, but it is a lot of the things that we needed that were essential. Let's get those things, and then let's go work on the next set of things that still need to be done. That's where I meet a lot of Republicans where they are on it. We've also got some other folks that say, hey, if it's not everything, I'm going to do nothing. We just have to be able to decide on what we're going to be able to do, what we can get done, and then to move forward and do it.